Making the choker.
Okay, so now it's time to make the choker piece, okay? And this piece is made with fine silver for the wire part. So what you'll want to do, I used fine silver for two reasons. One is it's really soft and much easier to bend and get really good connections because you need to get these all really tight. And then the second reason is because it tends to fuse together a little bit. So the fusing helps everything get connected. So you're going to need 4 3-inch pieces of fine silver on your supply list. Fine silver 14 gauge, okay? And the 14 gauge wire, you cut it into 3-inch pieces. Now you're also going to need a piece of bezel strip. This bezel strip is, I think it's 28 gauge, and it's just really flimsy bezel wire, and it's about 6 millimeters wide. And I used that to make the end parts. The end parts here. You will need to cut 2 additional tube sets for the connector pieces on the end, and those are the 5.6 millimeter tube, the same tubes will use for the feet on the bottom of your pendant, okay?
I cut mine about 3.2 mils tall each.
These are 3.17. Cut them 3.1, roughly around there. Now, if they come out where if you measure them after you cut them and one's off a little bit, that's normal. So take the one that is the tallest and just rub it on some flat sandpaper until it gets to be the correct measurement of the other one, okay? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is you need to find something that has about a 2-inch curve. This is a 2-inch. I'm just using the die from the, or you could use a
2-inch pipe from the hardware store, or a cuff mandrel.
What you want to do is you just kind of want to bend the wires until they kind of take on this shape. You can see. And then you also want to hold it up to your neck to make sure that it's, it fits you the way you want it to fit. So I just started with all these wires. I tried to get them, unkink them. If you have, I have one of these nylon jaw pliers. It's good for straightening wire. Just makes them nice and straight, but it also hardens them, so don't do it too much. If your wire's a little bit bent. And I'll just show you how I bent them. All right. So here we have the wires. We're going to just bend one. Okay. And you want to get it to a shape that feels good on your neck. And I'm just going to show you compared to this one. It's probably, and these are going to be a little bit long, so don't worry about that. Okay. There we go. So that's kind of okay. And then I'm going to do them all and lay them inside of each other. Okay. So I'm just going to keep bending and keep stacking. The bottom one is the one that's going to determine the shape the most, so that's the one you're going to want to really focus on. Then when you get them all together, you need to kind of form them out so that they lay next to each other and they're flat. This is much easier to do with fine silver, so I don't recommend you try to do it with sterling. You could make yourself crazy. It's just so much easier to bend the soft wire. And once they're all attached, they will be very secure. All right, so you want to kind of just get them all together. And it takes a little bit of finagling.
I recommend you grab the bottom wire and you hold it up to your neck.
And make sure that it's not too curved. You might want to pull it out a little bit. Okay, and when you get it to be the shape that you want, you can decide that that's where you want to go. I will put a photocopy of one of mine on the list or on the downloads so that you can kind of compare your connectors and make sure that they're kind of like around the same size as mine. That's the only way I can tell you, since I can't really be there when you bend it. All right, so then I'm just going to finagle these ends and get these ends to bend the way I want them. Make sure they're all nice and neat. Okay, so I've got 2 here that fit pretty nicely together. Don't worry so much about the ends because those are going to be trimmed off anyway, but you got to get like most of it together. Then just take the next piece of wire and you'll have to bend it a little bit until it fits right inside and molds together with the other ones. You might have to bend the sides out a wee bit. And you just keep playing until you get these all. This will be a little frustrating for some of you, but it didn't take me very long to do it, so. Hello, teddy bear. My dog is down here between my legs. And now I'm just going to trim off some of these ends that I know I don't need because I want it to be able to move them and make them all fit together. So I'm just going to take my clippers, I'm going to hold them together and just trim off one side. Just a little bit. I just took about, I don't know, a couple of mils off there. So it's just easier to control them. The easiest way to get these to fit together is to just, once you get them all pretty close, but maybe something's not fitting in, like, see here, I got a little gap here. Let's zoom in. Is to just take them one at a time, and wherever the gap is, put your finger on that part, and then bend just that part. So for example, this one, this top one, has got a big gap right here. So I'm just going to arch it a little bit right there. Put it back in, see if I can get it to fit in there. Okay, so that's how you do it. And then we're going to go over to the soldering table and get these all together. But, you know, don't get too frustrated. You just have to work with these one at a time. And
you can refer to the template that is in your download section that we discussed earlier with a picture of the actual size of the choker to kind of see if you're getting yours along the same shape as mine, and just make it work for you. Soldering together the wires. Alright, so I'm going to be using 22 gauge easy solder wire, and I'm going to cut it into about 5 millimeter, so it's very thin solder wire, by the way. And I'm going to cut it into about, I don't know, maybe 10 millimeter pieces. See what I'm doing here. And I'm going to, once again, just double check my piece here. I've got it all pushed together as much as I can get it. That wire is really easy to manipulate, so you might have to do some more adjusting once you get it over here. First, you want to get it hot. You want to use a charcoal block because it will help the fusing action. Just don't want anything to move around on you. Now it's fine silver, and you're on a charcoal block, so this could very well just fuse for you. It might just fuse together anyway. You just want to be careful. It's super easy to melt it because of the charcoal block. So I would just kind of go over it, swoop over it, keep that flame moving. And when it starts to get pink, you might get some fusing. Just don't keep your torch in one place for too long. And have a pick handy because things will pull apart a little bit. Like I just had some pulling here. The silver's kind of expanding and contracting. And it will do that. You just want to try to keep them all touching. As it gets hot, it's really easy to pull it in. But this can just melt on you in like a New York second. So you just want to be really careful not to move your torch, hold your torch anywhere too long. Fusing is tricky, so I'm not going to try to get you to fuse it if you've never done that before. We're going to solder it just to make sure it's really secure. Now I'm just using my pick to hold everything in place and lightly hitting it until they all start to kind of come together a little bit. Okay? Alright, now I'm going to go over it with some flux, reheat it. And we're going to add some solder in there. If something starts to pull apart, just be careful you don't melt anything, but just take your pick and kind of push it back into place and you should be fine. Okay, so now I'm going to add my solder chips in there, and I'm just placing them apart about, 10 mils apart, 10 millimeters apart, and I'm only putting solder in the crevices between the wires. I'm just going along each row because that solder will flow. You don't want to put them too close because they'll all join together. And I'm going up to the next row, and I'm getting it right in between the where the wires are. So you want to fill up the space between each row. So where the little gaps are, that's where the wires meet. That's where in the crevices there, that's where you want to place the solder chips. Do that for each row. There's 3 rows. All right. I'm going to light my torch. And my flame is not too bushy. If you're using a torch like mine, it's going to back up here and show you that. And that's a really tight flame, so I'm going to a little less oxygen. Less oxygen gives you a softer flame, you see? I don't need a really tight flame, so I'm taking down the oxygen. And if you have an acetylene torch, you don't have to worry about that. There's only one speed on that, if it's all silversmith torch. Anyway, all right, have your torch handy, and you're going to hold it about this far away, and I want you to see that. And now I'm going to zoom in so you can see the action. I'm not actually going right on the silver first. I'm just going to dust over it like this now. Everything nice and warm. Be careful you don't melt it. You have to cut yourself 4 new pieces and start again. Okay, now I'm going to add a little flux. And I'm going to just work my way down and back and forth, keeping my torch moving. And I got this pick handy right here because things are going to go real fast. I might need to move some things around. I might not. We'll just see how it all goes. So far, so good. You might see that you might want to add a few more pieces of solder if it looks weird or if you've got any gaps. But you only want to add the solder from one side because if you don't, it's going to run through and make a big mess. Just make sure you've melted it all the way. A lot of people will stop before it's really flowed. You need to make sure that it's melted without melting your wire, okay? When it starts to get shiny, something's about to melt, and that's probably your wire. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to stop there and just take a look. Got a little crusty there, and I can see there's a big gap here, okay? And that's pretty normal. But that's going to have to be repaired. So what I would do is pickle it, quench it, pickle it. You got to get all this soot off, and then squeeze all this wire together again until everything's nice and tight, and we're going to hit it again with some more solder, okay? Sometimes you can just do it right here on the bench, but if you've got this black stuff, you got to get that off. That's why I say quench it. While it's hot, though, it's really easy to squeeze together. Just using some pliers. See? Looking good. And we're going to hit it one more time. Okay, so I'm back and I have my piece out of the pickle. And if you hold it up to the light, you can see, like I can see right here where I needed more. If I just pull it apart, you'll see it there, see? Where I need more solder. So it should be super annealed and easy to squeeze right back down in there. Just make sure you're watching how deep you have to go because it can be a little bit deceiving. And you want to solder always from the same side. Okay? So lay it back down on your charcoal block with the side you soldered on face up. If you find that your solder doesn't fit in the curve, then that just means it's too long and you should take some clippers and trim it down and make it fit. And that's what I'm doing here. Cut some smaller pieces. If you make them too big, they're not going to fit into the grooves. They're going to roll around and they'll make a big mess on the back of your piece, and you don't want that. Move in here now. The whole thing does need to be hot though, so I'm going to just kind of run my torch over and then focus over here, keeping everything moving. Have your pick handy just in case something moves on you, because you should always hold your torch in your non-dominant hand and your pick in your dominant hand. And I'm just going to keep my pick right here because this is where I want to concentrate. Keeping it moving, keeping it moving. And not even right now, I'm just, it doesn't need to be right on that silver 24/7. Make sure you're not too close either. You can melt something. Now you see that extra solder is now starting to flow. There we go. Now it's melted, but it hasn't like run yet. So I'm going to get it to run a little bit by just heating up the whole piece here. Just waiting till all that solder starts to flow and join things together. No gaps. You want no gaps, nowhere, no how. Okay? Okay, that looks good. I'm comfortable with that. I'm going to turn my torch off. It's a little stuck to my block there. But I don't see any more gaps, and I don't. But if you do, you have to just repeat that process, okay? You want to hold it up, pickle it, quench it, then pickle it. Hold it up to the light, and if you see any light, or if you try to move it with your fingers, it shouldn't move on you. And there we have the first part done. You can see I've got some rough spots of silver solder in here. And when we patina that, not much of that's going to show. Also, you'll have a front side and a back side. The back side should be where you did the solder. And so if anything flowed and got runny on the back, it won't really matter because it's not going to show on the front. I do have like a little blob there. So with that little blob, I would just take a file and file it right off. Be careful that you don't make you're only filing on the solder and you're not filing on the wire. Okay. This is a good time to just use your flush cutters and even up the ends so that they're straight. And I'm going to use my Fat Daddy snips or my Kiba flush cutters and just even up the ends here on each side. And then we'll mark the center. Okay, so you need to mark the center, and then you can trim it to your size. Okay, so I've trimmed my ends off here. So I found the center, so I'm just going to measure about 30 centimeters out from the center and make a little mark with a Sharpie like I did there. So 30 millimeters out from the center. You can see how I marked it. Okay. So I'm just going to, you can either clip it with clippers or... So I'm just going to use my Fat Daddy snips, and I'm going to just snip off with my flush cutters that much on each side, okay? And this is what I've got left. I didn't, if you have the Fat Daddy flush cutters, it's much easier to get a cut. Okay, so in your handout section, there will be a little photocopy of the size that I use here, okay? And it's about 2 1/4 inches long. If you've got a bigger neck, you're probably gonna wanna make yours bigger. This is just kind of an average size, okay? So mine is 2 1/4 if I hold it up. If you're doing centimeters, it is, let's see, 57, 58 centimeters, okay? Anyway, you can kind of compare yours there if it's helpful for you. So the next step would be then to get out your wire your bezel wire. So what we're going to do is just wrap this bezel wire around your neck piece, okay? So I've already done the right side. So what you want to do is make sure the bottom side is facing you. Wrap your bezel wire starting from about the second wire from the bottom and wrap it over the top. You need to keep it as tight as you possibly can. So hold it with your thumb and then try to secure it around, squeezing it together and keeping it nice and tight. So you get a good tight connection. Try to make sure that your bezel wire doesn't go out of alignment. Just hold it straight as you can and squeeze it in, and then fold the bottom part up over the top and make sure it's nice and tight. You always want to finish at the top. So then take your cutters and just cut about where the second wire is so you don't see that cut from the top. Right? You always want to finish at the top, and that's the place that'll be least irritating. I have already done the one side, the right side, so you'll have to repeat that on the other side. Now I'm just taking a marker and done right and left so that I don't get them confused if I take them off. Alright? Soldering the bezel wire covers. Alright, so before we go any further, you should have both pieces on here. Try to make sure that they're not creased in the front, okay? If they are, maybe you want to make a new one. And if you have one, see how mine's kind of going down sideways a little bit? Scoot it up so that it's even. And let the overhang, hang over the end a bit so that there's just a little bit of bezel hanging over the top. Because we're going to file off all that unevenness. You just to make sure that they get even. Just take a little file and even off. I'm not filing this part. I'm just filing off this little piece so that it's even and level. Because sometimes when you fold them over, they don't, they get off a little bit. Okay. So I've got the end caps overhanging just a hair of a feather, just a little bit. That way when we melt the solder down inside of there, it won't flow over the sides. Okay? And I'm going to do one end at a time. So I've got mine up in my third arm, and I'm going to tilt it so that it's straight up and down. And I'm going to just put some solder right on the end of that and heat it and let it run down, okay? And you want to make sure you've got the back part facing toward you, okay? So that this is the bottom and this is the top, and this is the back of the piece, and the fold over flap is on the right hand side. And all I'm going to do is just take some easy solder and melt it into that little spot. Now I don't want it to flow everywhere, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little ball out of my solder. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done this before, but sometimes it makes things a little bit easier. Okay, and now I'm just going to take my torch, and I'm going to make little solder balls. There's one, there's two, there's three, there's four. And again, we're working with easy, so we're just going to get this hot. A little, you want it to turn a little white and powdery. Right down inside of there. Okay? And then I'm just going to take my little solder ball, and you should put your solder balls in a cup of flux because it will make them stick right on there where you want them to go. And then I'm going to put one right here, and I'm just going to heat my torch in my non-dominant hand. I'm going to heat, and I want you to keep your eye on that ball. We want it to flow right down inside. You don't want it to flow over the top, okay? So that's why I'm heating from the back side. Because solder goes where the heat flows. Or solder flows where the heat goes. Is that how that goes? Neither do I. There we go. Alright. I got a nice gentle flame, so I'm not going to blow that sucker off. Heating it up, heating it up, heating it up. And that solder will... See, it's already kind of dropped down inside. I'm just going to keep heating it. Alright. This bezel will melt really easy though, so now I'm going to hit it from the top. So you do need to get this really hot because you want it to flow down inside. If the solder just sits on top, it's not securing that on there anywhere, okay? So you want to make sure you get this nice and hot. And you might have to heat up more of the piece than just the end. Ooh, my flame is doing weird stuff here. There we go. Alright, so I can see that the solder went down inside. I'm just gonna check it and make sure that's really on there. If it didn't, and I'm even just hit it a little bit from underneath. Just be careful though, you don't want to melt that little tiny bezel wire because it can melt super easy. Now I'm going to turn it around and do the other side. Just going to hit it on the other side. You want it to kind of flow down, some kind of heat from underneath. Okay? Just getting it to flow where we want it to. Alright, so that should be good. Everything looks like it's in there. And I'm happy. Just do the exact same thing on the other side. This is really easy. It might look complicated, but it really is pretty easy. I mean, the first time I tried it, I got it, and I've done it several times, and I never have an issue. Hopefully you won't either. If you just follow along and follow all the directions that I gave you, you shouldn't have any issues either. Okay, so you want to turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. And then I'll come back down. I've got the back of the piece faced towards me. Coming back up again. There it goes, it flowed. Now I'm just going to heat real well to make sure that everything flowed down inside. So a lot of times what happens is it doesn't get in this little flap here, and you want it to. So keep heating. And if you need to add another piece, add another piece. I think I am just going to add one more piece there because it looked like a really small ball. And I want to get it down inside this flap, and that's why you need to keep it towards you. Okay, there we go. And that's what you want. Okay, so we're all set. We've got all of our solder. Everything's on there. Now the next thing to do would be to quench it and just double check that it's really on there tight. And you don't want anything lifting up. You don't want any of these little flaps lifting up or being able to unfold. Okay, so it's in the pickle. So it's time for a teddy break. Teddy break, teddy break. Who's the precious doggy? Oh, he don't tweet. Is he don't tweet? Okay, let's go check the pickle. Cleaning up and filing. Okay, so we've got ours out of the pickle, and we just need to do a little bit of cleanup. So I have some solder that's spilled on the back. So the first thing I'll do is just take an emery board or an emery file. You can get these from Rio or your local nail supply. Sally Beauty has them. But you can use something. Just use a filing stick with some 500 grit sandpaper would work really well too. And I'm just going to go over where I had the extra solder spill and take that right off. Okay. And the other thing you might want to have to clean up here is if you had any of your inside lip showing, like, you know, the fold over part. So you'd want to have a barrette file, and that is, there's no teeth on the back. It's shaped like a little pyramid, and there is a filing area on the front. And you would just simply put it right inside if you had any overlapping, you know, parts of your bezel, and you could go back and forth and clean that up. I don't really have any overlapping parts. Maybe a little bit here. Towards you, and you can just go in there and clean that up that way, okay? If you need to. If any of your fold over is showing. Then the next thing we're going to do is just take a flat file and smooth off these edges. I usually go sideways and then forward. Ooh, that's not a good noise. Anyway, just file till you get it nice and even and flat. And if you hold it this way, and you file this way, it's going to probably be your best bet. And turn it often so that you can see what you're doing here. And you want to file this down until there's no bumpiness. And once you get them straight and they look pretty smooth, we're going to deal with these little flaps. So we've got these little flaps here, but I'm going to start with a regular flat file. I just kind of want to go over it so that it feels really smooth. Kind of make it blend in with the other piece. There's no lip there. You don't want any lip. Okay, this is just gentle filing.
And it's pretty easy, it goes really fast. Where's the lip? Sometimes you can't even see that lip. And you want to file in the direction away from, so the lip is right here and I want to file that way. Not towards it, but away from it. Because that way I'm not filing the thin bezel underneath, I'm just filing the overlap top part, okay? So we're just going to smooth that out, make that look real pretty. Getting rid of all that spilled solder that I had there, too. You just want to feel it. It should feel really soft. It shouldn't have any hard bits on it. You know, you want to make sure it feels nice and good on your neck. There's nothing worse than scratchy jewelry. I can't stand it. Oh, it's like, no, no, no. Take that stuff off and fix it. Okay, so we've got everything kind of smoothed out here, and we're going to now make a little round groove like I did here on this piece for your tube set to go in. It's very slight, it's not very deep. So what you want to do is just kind of mark the center, and what I would do is just maybe put a little scratch in it with a round file. I'm using a round file here. And I'm going to go on both sides from the front. This is the front of the piece, and I'm just marking the center so I can see what I'm doing. Just put a little scratch there. And I'm just going to, you have to hold this really straight when you do it, or your groove will be in the wrong place. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can do it with a round file, or you can do it with one of these sanding drums that fits on your flex shaft. Compartment. So I'm kind of getting there. I'm just making a nice little groove. Then switch to your half round file. And we're going to use the half round file to just smooth out the whole thing and get a nice crescent so there's no lumps and bumps. It just looks like one continuous piece of metal. Okay? Just keep checking, and when you're pleased with the way it looks and it sits right in the center, then go ahead and do the other side. And then we'll solder them on. Soldering on the end tubes. Now we're going to solder on those little tube rings. Alright, I recommend you, just before you solder, you go back in with a polishing pen or a pumice wheel. This is a polishing pen. There'll be a link for these. This has got kind of a wide edge on it. These are great. I really love these. I just recently discovered them. And I'm going to just take off all the rough edges from all that filing again. Okay. All right, and you see how the ends now look shiny and pretty? Back, and this is the front, okay? So now we've got our little piece with our little edges are curved, and all we have to do is solder the little circles onto the side, the tube side. All right, so I recommend you put your piece not on a charcoal block because it could get too hot and melt. So I would put it on a honeycomb block, or just a simple solder brick would be fine. And we're going to make sure that you get these even, because if you get them off center, it's going to look really, really silly. So just center them right in between your little curves there. Okay, so the two most important things is that this jump ring is centered, or the tube is centered right in the middle of your four parts there, and that it is touching, the connectors are touching. Then I just lay a piece of, you can hammer a little piece of solder so it's flat, and it'll lay flat right on top of both pieces, and that's why you hammer it, so that it joins both. It's a little bit wider, okay? And I did the same thing on this side, and then when we heat them up, it should flow right down inside. So just kind of heating this up a little bit. Now remember, that tube is going to get hot a lot faster than the other side. And both sides, anytime you solder, both sides have to be equally hot, okay? So it's really important to make sure that you're heating both, and if your solder doesn't work, that's usually why. When all the solder will flow to one piece, the hottest piece,
and it can totally miss out on the other. And I'm just going to pass lightly over the two and try to get that solder to pull down into the bottom. Okay, looks like it worked there. That looks good. Let's turn it over to the other side and do the other side. Super important that both pieces are touching each other, because the solder won't fill in a gap. That jump ring was getting a little bit too hot because I'm working from the other side here. And I see that, there we go, that tube was off center. Right, let's get this moving up here. Give it a little bit of flux. And I want that solder to pull down. If I just keep the flame on the tube, it's going to melt the tube. So I have to really be strategic with my flame and go round and round. All right, I see the solder kind of just sitting up here, so I'm going to help it a little bit and pull it over. And I might need an extra piece of solder. Let's see what happens here. Looks like I got a connection, but I think I'm going to just add another little piece on there just to be sure. There we go. I want to scoot down in there a little bit. I'm actually just going to do that. See where that leads me. Okay, I definitely got a connection that time. Might have gotten a little too much solder. I'm just going to turn it this way because what I'm trying to do is get the solder to pull back. And it did. Great. I'm going to let that cool just for a second because it's kind of stuck to the plate and I don't want to... There we go. Came off. All right. Clench it. And it's okay if you didn't get, a good connection. Go back and do it again. It's not a big deal. It'll be just fine. And it does happen. So you just want to make sure that you cannot twist that off. It's really on there. All right? And there you go. So now we have one more thing to do. We have to attach the little U wire that's going to go here. Okay? So I'm going to pickle this, get it cleaned up, and we're going to cut some grooves for the U. Let's make the bail. So to make the little arches, I used 16 gauge. You want to use sterling silver. But sterling silver will be harder and it won't bend on you, so that's what I'd recommend. I make a little oval. I wrap it around my oval bezel mandrel that I have, and I made a little oval. You might want to make 2 ovals, but if you do make 2 ovals, make sure that when you do it, so you make an oval like I did here, and then flip your, since it's a tapered mandrel, flip your mandrel around into the other side so that when you make your second one, it will be the same size. If you're making more than one pendant, or several, you might want to make a few more of these. But you want your ovals to be the same size, okay? So my ovals are roughly about 19 millimeters tall and about 18.5 millimeters tall and about 15 millimeters wide. Anything similar to that will be fine. And if you don't have an oval bezel mandrel, maybe you find something that's oval shaped, like the end of a hammer. Usually is a pretty good oval as well. Okay, anyway, what you're going to do is you're going to take these and you're going to trim them, and we're going to use them for the little arches on our pendant. So we're cutting 2 ovals, and I just used the oval bezel mandrel and I made one a little bit taller than the other. And what you're going to do is you're going to get your bail and you're going to get your flower, and you're going to make sure whatever, if you stamped it at the top, that's the way you have to You can either do it this way and stamp it vertically if you want to put your logo on the back. You can do this one of two ways. You can have your flower going this way, and it's a little bit easier to attach your oval. That might be a little bit easier if you have the flat part at the top. But since I stamped my logo vertically on the point, I'm going to have to do mine this way. And that's why I need my one piece here to be a little bit longer, all right? So you can cut your ovals to fit. And the top one here is going to have to come up into the back. And you want it to come up into the back, I would say about to the second wire. You want it to go right up to the second wire, and we'll file a little space in there. And in order to get it centered easily on your piece, you can lay your pendant bail, this choker part, we'll call it the choker part. You can lay it on grid paper and just center the corners out between two squares, and it'll be really easy for you to find the center. And now I can see that this line right here is the center. So what I would do if I were you is mark that part. Mark the center so you can get your piece on straight. And you want to make sure the bottom of your piece is facing out. So you, again, look for those seams, and you want to be working from the back side. The back side should be on top. So I'm just going to draw a straight line where the center is. Okay, that's my center. And I'm going to work from there. Okay, so that should help me get a nice, easy way to get that soldered on. Now, what you're going to want to do next then is you're going to want to get out a triangle file. Probably would work the best to get started if you have something that has a triangle edge, just to get you started. And you're going to make a couple of file marks where you're going to lay this piece into. So I want you to see right here. So I kind of just made a couple of little grooves in there where I want to solder this on. Just make sure you've got it centered, because there's nothing worse than a bail that's off center. So I've just taken a little Sharpie and I've marked right where I want to attach. So this line right here is my center, and I centered my little U shape over there. And then the next thing to do would just be to file out, take your file. You can do this a couple of different ways. You can do it with burrs, or you can do it with just a regular file. And file some grooves there, so it'll be really easy for you to get your wire in there. And I'm just going to start with a triangle file, if I can find one. Okay. And I'm going to just make a little groove, nice and straight, where I want this to go. Okay, and on both sides. So I've just used the edge of a triangle file, okay, just because it'll make it won't get on the other two wires, it'll just kind of get the groove started. And you're going to want your wire to sit right up in there. And then just go back in with a round file and make it a little bit wider. You don't want to file up on the top, you just want to stay down here in this bottom one, okay? You can go up to the second wheel, but you don't, or the second ring, but you don't want to go. So if you kind of hold your file at an angle, and you don't want to go too deep, because then you'll be able to see the file marks from the bottom, and you don't want that either, okay? I'm going to go back to my triangle file, because now I need to get the groove into the second ring. I just got it into the first one. So I'm just going to use the edge here. See if I can get it in there a little bit. But a ball burr works really well for this too, if you want to use a ball burr. I didn't want to make you guys have to buy special burrs, but if it were me and I was doing this, I would use a ball burr. But I'm going to show you how to do it without one, because some of you may not have those. All right. Try to go back in with my round file. I'm just trying to make another groove at the top. This is the back of a half round. I'm just improvising here. Get yourself some ball burrs so I can teach y'all how to do it with a ball burr. A lot of you do have burrs, but a lot of you don't. So That'd just be an extra tool you have to buy. Okay, so use whatever files you got to kind of make a nice little indent in the first 2 rows. But be careful not to go outside of these 2 rows, because if you do, these 2 wire rows, it's going to look really icky. You don't want it to look icky. You want it to be pretty. So we're just trying to file out. I'm using it back of a small half round file. I'm just trying to file out a little place for the wire to lay down into. When you get them finished, set your U-shaped wire inside. Long. And then we're going to go over to the soldering block and solder it. Soldering on the bail. Okay, so you just want to go over these sides here. Make sure you know which part is the front and which part is the back. You should, because you just filed the holes in there. But just, I would cover all of this area up here on the end with some yellow ochre, because you don't want anything falling off. And we just used easy solder on this whole thing. But you know, it'll be fine if you just do it this way. I've done so many of these and I just do them this way. Easy all the way, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Okay, so that should not move on you if you get that. Okay, done. So I have this here on a honeycomb block again, because I don't want to overheat it. And I'm just going to use a flat titanium clip. And I'm going to lay that there, and this should kind of elevate it so it doesn't fall forward, okay? So I'm going to lay this here, get it right in those little grooves. It's going to tell me right where to put it, and I'm going to bring it up just to the second. I have a little black Sharpie on the center of my U-shaped one too, so I can kind of keep it in the middle. And the titanium clip should not be touching anything except this little U. It's just going to kind of rest on there to elevate it and lift it up a little bit. So I'm lining up that little mark on the bottom with the other 2 marks. I'm just going to push this down until it's in the right spot. Okay, so, and I've got the bottom line is even here, and I'm making sure that this doesn't come up past my second wire, okay? So I'm just using a brush dipped in flux to see if I can get some little solder chips to do the job here. And I'm placing the solder chips inside and out of the piece. You've got everything centered, and if you do, you're okay to start heating. I'm just going to kind of go around it a little bit. I don't want those solder chips to flow out of place. They like to do that. And you don't want to touch the wire, okay? You want to just, the U. You just want to touch the rest of it. Both parts have to be equally hot for the solder to flow, so just be careful you don't overheat one part before the other one. And I can see my solder balls actually moved on me. My little solder balls just kind of disappeared, so I'm just going to put a bigger piece, mostly so you guys can see. And I'll put a bigger piece on each side here. I think there's a piece of solder there, but I can't even see it anymore. Whoops. If you don't have the little chips, or those little chips are so frustrating to use. I really hate them, to be honest with you. So I'm just going to do it this way. And hopefully I can get that to lay down now. Let's try this again. This is real life. Try not to edit out the mistakes because you guys don't learn anything. Right? Alright, so let's go at this again. Have your pick handy. And make sure the solder is touching both parts, okay? Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm going to give it a little bit more flux. And just be real careful not to overheat that U wire, the connector. This whole base has got to get hot in order for those little joins to flow. So I've got to heat up this whole thing here. And there, it's going into a little ball. This one is too. I'm getting a hot spot in my honeycomb block, and you have to watch those things too, because those will cause a heat sink, and then things will start to melt. underneath, and you don't want that to happen either. There's one just melted, the other just melted. I'm just going to turn this around a little bit so I can see what's going on the other side. Let me back up so you can watch me rotate. Okay, so that looks like it's good and hot. And everything seems to be well melted. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my torch. And let this sit for a second. And then try to get it off. You have to be careful with these honeycomb blocks. Things stick. And they do make heat sinks. Like you saw that one part going down that could easily have melted the front. So you really have to keep your eye on that stuff. These charcoal or these honeycomb blocks get really, really hot. And I want you to... So you can quench and pickle this. Now we're going to smooth out the tips of the bale. Alright, so we got our piece out of the pickle and it looks really good and we've got a nice join on there. But we've got these big, huge bumps and those will feel horrible on the back of your neck. So take a small flat file and be really careful and just thin this out a little bit. Don't let your file hit anything else. You just want to make this kind of flat and then we'll go over it with a pumice wheel and we'll smooth it out. And be really careful you're not filing your piece. You're just, we're just filing these little top parts flat, okay? So I'm just going to go over it sideways. I'm going to put my finger in the way. So I'm being sure that I don't file my pendant, this for the connector. Just this little U-shaped wire, that's all we're filing. If you go any deeper, it's not going to be good. And then we're going, like I said, we'll go over it with the pumice wheel and make it nice and soft. Give it a couple of good once-overs, and don't go any lower than the U, because if you do, it'll look bad. Okay? Okay, so hopefully you can see this now, where I have made these flat, okay? All right, but they still feel a little bit bumpy, so we have to take off all of these rough edges. Get out your barrette file again, and it's the one that has the no teeth on the, it's triangle shaped on one side and flat on the other, and there's no teeth on either side. And then what you can do is put the flat side against the back, and you can just file down these corners. The flat side that doesn't have any teeth against the back, and then you won't be filing your pendant, you'll just be filing this little connector. And smooth off all of those little pieces. And then we'll go over it with our pumice wheel. Okay, just a little bit, you don't need much. It might even feel a little bit sharper after you do it, but that's okay because we're going to take it down with our pumice wheel next, okay? All right. I'm actually going to use a Timo tip. They work a little bit faster sometimes. They take off a little bit more metal. And I'm just going to kind of hold it and go up over and clean off any sharp edges. On both sides. Run your finger across it and have it be really smooth. And once you get it to that stage, you'll be good. You don't want to take off too much metal though, because then this will snap and break, okay? And so you want to make sure that you're only smoothing out the rough parts and just taking a little, you're making it a little bit sloped, a little bit flat. But most of the flat part is right up here at the very top. On the second wire. Okay, so once you have these all nice and smooth, and you can run your finger across them and they don't hurt and they don't irritate and they don't bother you, then you're good. So I just went back with some steel wool and kind of cleaned up the grooves a little bit and polished up the outside, and it's looking really nice. And the back is looking nice too. And all you have to do from here on out is decide if you want to do any more decorations on this bale. If you do decide to put on some bezel cups, I'll show you how to do that in the next video. But if not, you're done with the bale, and you can just set it aside, or you can toss it in the tumbler and polish it up.